bushfire support. Today's webinar is a high-level overview. It is a 30-minute webinar and it is designed just to, at a very high level, go over some of the common reactions that our staff, our customers, our family and friends might be experiencing, and different types of trauma we'll be going through, and also how to manage your own self-care in the situation, as well as how we can support others. I will try and make it as interactive as possible for a 30-minute webinar. If you do have any questions or comments, please post them. Only I can see them on the chat function, and I will attempt to get through as many questions as possible. However, please bear in mind that if you do have specific individual questions to your needs, I do recommend that you contact our contact centre, my coach service at Benestar, and the number for that is 1800 360 364. My name is Michelle Carter. I'm the Organisational Development Manager at Benestar. I want to also preface this session by advising those participants that have logged in today. We will be potentially discussing some topics that might be triggering for some. The scale and intensity of our current bushfire is large and unprecedented. It's been going on for months, and media coverage for the month of January has been at its peak, often leading to feelings of helplessness, fear, worry and anxiety. And I just want to remind all of you attending our webinar today and listening in that some of you are either personally affected or you might have those within your community or family, friends, colleagues or customers that may have been directly impacted or may have even been involved in prior bushfire situations. And so the content, as I said, can be triggering for you. And if you do feel triggered, I want to please advise that you do contact Benestar for any individual support. We do also have some handouts that are attached to the webinar today. You will also be receiving a recording of this session for those that registered, that were either attended or were unable to attend live. They can watch the recording at a later date, and you should receive that by tomorrow. So in terms of an agenda of this session, we'll be going through some of the common reactions, what most distressed people want or need when they have suffered through a traumatic event, such as a natural disaster. Now, I am talking about or focusing more on the bushfire natural disaster, but of course, Australia is still currently going through another natural disaster, and that is the drought. So very similarly, it will affect people in the same way in terms of it being a traumatic event. We will also be going through how we can support those in distress and, as mentioned, look after yourself, which is very important to your own well-being and to look after your own self-care in a situation. And then, of course, at Benestar and other community support available that we do recommend. So in terms of some common reactions, we have categorised the reactions into these 4 areas. So many people naturally would have strong reactions following the experience of a traumatic event. When it happens instantly, they would go into an amygdala hijack, the fight, flight, freeze response that most of us know it to be called. And this is the limbic or stress response. It is where the amygdala is the stress response reaction, and it will actually kick in, which switches off our logical, rational part of the brain. So when our amygdala kicks in, it's normally instant and it will happen, and it normally lasts for about 15 to 20 minutes. But that can be triggered from watching the news, it can be re-triggered from someone having a discussion about the fires, it can be triggered from overhearing conversations with customers or colleagues at work. And when that amygdala is triggered, their rational, logical decision making, the neocortex, the front part of the brain, actually switches off. So from a cognitive perspective, people are not able to recall basic factual information because that rational part of the brain has actually switched off. When they are in this limbic stress response, it might actually be going on for a prolonged period of time, which is not helpful. It is not, our bodies are not designed to be in that stress response for a long period of time. And we find that people that have suffered through a traumatic event, whether that directly to themselves or indirectly through witnessing others or through hearing stories or even watching the news of others, it can actually affect your well-being and your mental health if it is at a prolonged state of stress. So from a physical perspective, we find that that people that have suffered through a traumatic event either have excessive alertness or the other side, they go into fatigue or exhaustion. And this is because of that stress limbic system response. Because they're on, when they are under that stress response, what happens is the body pumps through adrenaline, hence the excessive alertness, and the other hormone that it pumps through our body is cortisol, the stress hormone. And so both of those working for prolonged periods of time lead to excessive sort of alertness and maybe high energy, but then we have the lows, the fatigue, the exhaustion, because we have been on that adrenaline rush in order to the fight-flight mode for too long, that our body then, we feel exhausted and tired. They can also be easily startled from a physical perspective. They might be triggered. They might find that they're having trouble sleeping, and just general lack of physical well-being, such as aches and pains. Now, from the cognitive perspective, our thoughts and memories are triggered from the event. So people might be suffering from flashbacks, they might be having nightmares, and because they are still in that stress response, they might have that poor concentration or memory loss. They might be also feeling disorientated or confused. From a behavioural perspective, we find that people that do suffer through these events either avoid places or activities that remind them of the event. They might either, not be going to work. They might want to be living in a different location. They might not be socialising with family and friends, not going to hobbies or doing things, sporting events or things that they usually would have partaked as part of their routine. And it's a real sense of loss of interest in normal activities. Now, from an emotional perspective, often people can feel fearful. People do go through a range of different emotions when they suffer through loss, denial, anger, fear. So it depends on what stage people are at. It's a normal process that people will go through. Some people might still be feeling numb and they haven't actually dealt. They might still be in shock and they haven't dealt with the complexity of the situation. They might be suffering through depression, guilt, anger, irritability, anxiety, or panic. I just want to call out to the group, are there any other common reactions that you either might have experienced or that you might have witnessed? Please do use the chat function. Happy to call out and to the broader group if there are some other things that I haven't mentioned. So we know that when people are dealing with a crisis such as a natural disaster like a bushfire or a drought, it is very difficult. It's obviously often the worst thing that someone would have to experience in their life, and it results in very stressful behaviour. this limbic stress response is often so strong that it actually influences our emotions and behaviour. And so we need to be mindful that when people are reacting or saying things because they're not using their rational brain, it is because they are in this amygdala hijack, this limbic system response. As mentioned, obviously there's increased cortisol, and their emotions might be heightened, and they may be perceived to be overreacting to things that are not related to the actual event. And that is because they will have heightened sensitivity and stress levels. So these people are more focused on their emotional state than their rational state. So we need to acknowledge that their feelings are normal. And we also need to apply enormous amounts of empathy. We need to listen to those that are telling us about their situation or their experience. I'm just going to read out, a few of you are saying, hypervigilance, things such as, so physical manifestations, definitely. So things such as, heart palpitations, increased blood pressure, heart rate. Some people might suffer through panic attacks. It might mean more mental health issues. Definitely. So these are all manifestations of people that have gone through a traumatic event. So symptoms of the trauma, as we said, can be described as those 4 areas: the physical, the cognitive thinking, behavioural, which is our actions, and emotions, our feelings. Some things to remember are that when we are faced with a threat, such as a natural disaster, this is when this amygdala or the limbic system actually hijacks our logical, rational neocortex part of the brain. It's our survival mechanism kicking in, and it's the way that we've been designed for thousands of years in order to make sure that we either run away from danger or turn around and fight the danger. It is a natural human response. Some things that will occur as a result of it, some other reactions from a thinking perspective, is we may go into black and white thinking or tunnel judgment, where there is sort of no grey area. It's very extreme ways of thinking at either end of the spectrum. Vivid experiences can continue to trigger the trauma and the situation that was experienced. And it's often why people need to retell the story over and over again. So if an employee, say a colleague, has chosen to share with you the story, even if you feel, you are not the most appropriate person, or please encourage them to either, to chat to you, or encourage them to refer to someone else who might be able to support them. A lot of our organisations offer peer support officers. It might be a mental health first aider. Obviously, you can refer them to Benestar and they can speak to a clinician for that one-on-one support. Or, of course, I will go through at the end, there's a whole range of community-based resources that we do recommend people access. Now, of course, it's very important for people to also speak to family and friends and have that social interaction as well in order to debrief the situation. It's not healthy, as we know, for people to bottle it in. I will go through now some of the common different types of trauma, I should say. And please, if you do have any questions throughout, happy to answer those as well. Someone has just asked, they can't see the chat function. No, so with the GoToWebinar platform, only I can see the chat. It is for confidentiality reasons, but I will certainly draw out common themes and answer any questions that I think are relevant to the broader group. So in terms of different types of trauma, firstly we have direct. So direct means exactly that. You were directly involved in the traumatic event. Indirect means you may have seen it happen, so you witnessed the event, seen it happen to a family member or a member of the public or a customer or a colleague, and you witnessed it firsthand. And that includes perception of immediate harm to self or others. And direct or indirect trauma creates intense feelings. It may overwhelm or strain our coping mechanisms. It may disrupt our sense of power and control. It disrupts our normal beliefs. So our beliefs are what guide us. And if we have a change to our belief mechanism, such as people may now believe that after witnessing these traumatic bushfires, that Australia is not a safe place to live anymore. That could be an example of a change in their belief system. It can significantly impact the way that they live their lives. And by disrupting normal beliefs and assumptions regarding their self, society, their security, their well-being, and as I've said, it does involve that amygdala hijack, the fight, flight, freeze response. Then we have vicarious trauma. So vicarious trauma is a cognitive, so thinking type of trauma, and it's also a change in your belief system. So as an example, after watching the news, and we know that it has been all over the papers and social media and the news daily, that after people are exposed to this, so it's very hard not to be exposed to the media at the moment. It has probably died down a little bit in the past, say 5 days, but anyone that's sort of reading a paper or watching TV or on social media or devices is exposed to it. It's very hard to remove ourselves from the situation. And with vicarious trauma, if we are watching this media and we have a reaction when we're exposed to this disturbing information, often the reaction is gradual and it can be cumulative, and it's vicarious because it's secondhand. So it's a secondhand response. So we didn't witness it firsthand. It didn't happen to us, but we're exposed to it. So a lot of us attending today are most likely exposed to some form of, through these bushfires, vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma, as another example, would be, say, clinical staff, such as therapists or nurses or doctors. Part of their day in, day out, or emergency services, as an example, our firefighters, our ambulance, our police, they're exposed to very traumatic situations on a daily basis. And naturally, as human beings, we take on some of that trauma. So we feel sympathy for the person in this vicarious trauma experiencing the event, and we identify a personal connection with them. Often this happens when we are exposed to large amounts of vicarious trauma. Now, this can also lead to prolonged stress and overabundance of stress hormone, the cortisol, in ourselves as well. So we need to manage our own self-care through all the media that we may be watching and all the exposure we have. A lot of people, I have heard, have been mitigating exposure by purposely switching off social media and not trying to watch, the 6 o'clock news or the morning shows, to purposely mitigate their exposure to these traumatic situations. I'd like to hear from our participants on today. Do you have any other suggestions? What are you doing to mitigate your exposure from a vicarious trauma perspective? Okay. So some people are actually more buying things online, not trying to go out to public places too much. Talking about avenues of support, seeking accurate sources of information. Like such as ABC News, blocking images on social media, definitely. There's a whole range of things that we can do. There's some good suggestions. Channeling feelings into something good. I love that example. It's very beneficial for our well-being, and I'll go through that very shortly. Positive thinking, growth mindset, some of you may have heard of. And look, a lot of the things that we have mentioned so far have been quite negative. In terms of when we are exposed to a lot of negativity in our lives, not just from a traumatic event, but from a mental well-being perspective, it's been so beneficial that people focus on the good. So what have you got to be grateful for in your life? What is some positivity that you can draw on? That's a great example. Doing things to replenish self, helping others, yes, definitely. Compassion, giving back to others, volunteering. There's been a lot of opportunities for volunteering and donating for those less fortunate than ourselves during this crisis. So great suggestions. Yeah, focusing on the good that Australia's been doing. Some wonderful examples there. Speaking to family and friends. Perfect. So the last type of trauma that I have listed there is compassion fatigue. Now, this can occur to someone who regularly hears or witnesses difficult or traumatic events. So like I mentioned, obviously the clinical staff, therapists, nurses, doctors would be an example of that, or defence forces. They feel as they have nothing left to give. So they are so fatigued from witnessing these kinds of traumatic events on a daily basis that they actually move more into clinical mode. It's almost like a process mode people go through rather than displaying compassion or empathy because they feel they have nothing left to give. So it's developed because there's a strong desire to care for others, and often is the most caring individuals who feel the effects of compassion fatigue because they feel they don't have anything more to give. They're feeling burnt out and they're taking on, it presents itself, that compassion fatigue, as a variety of symptoms such as behavioural, emotional, relationship issues, physical, and it can actually sometimes be misdiagnosed, I should say, as depression. So, look, burnout is a state of chronic compassion fatigue. We've all heard of burnout. Physical and emotional exhaustion, cynicism and detachment. So that was that example I gave where often people feel like they're going through the motions. Feelings of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. And burnout is often a gradual build-up, and it's not recognised by self or others until it's quite far progressed. So often people only realise they're burnt out once they're not able to function effectively on a personal or professional level. However, burnout certainly doesn't happen suddenly. It is something that happens over a long period of time. So if identified early, it can be mitigated and supported and diagnosed through a lot of wellbeing strategies that can be put in place. The warning signs for burnout are things such as loss of hope or sense of control, cynicism or negative beliefs, negative view of the people they are helping, overwork, inability to delegate, exhaustion or irritability, disengagement or underinvolvement, or reduced engagement or lack of purpose, and changes to sleep and eating patterns. So I hope you have a little bit more of an understanding of different types of trauma and some of the reactions we get from the different types. So what do most distressed people want or need? So we've just put down 4 categories there, but as briefly discussed, distressed people want to be heard, they want to be listened to. Often it's very therapeutic for them to retell their story over and over and again. So we need to display active listening, empathetic listening, trying to understand from a perspective of, what they could be going through, treat them respectfully, certainly don't mention things like there are worse off people than you. You need to look on the bright side. because those kind of comments can really trigger someone and be quite hurtful while they're in this limbic state of response. So they're not thinking rationally or clearly. They want to feel supported. They want to be listened to. They want to be shown empathy and compassion, and they want to know that how they're feeling, how they're behaving is normal, considering the extreme situation that they have gone through. Someone has mentioned that some victims may get service fatigue. So, yeah, they may be contacted by numerous agencies after the event and have to retell their story over and over, and that can be detrimental. Definitely, that's a very good point. You know, we need to be conscious that every time someone will retell it, that it can be triggering for them. So how can we support those in distress? We've just mentioned some things here, such as making sure that we do let them know it's okay to feel the way that they feel. It is completely normal that they will be going through a range of emotions, that they, you know, physical symptoms such as lack of sleep or lack of concentration or sort of heightened manic emotions, exhaustion are all normal reactions. As discussed, all you can do is listen and show compassion and understanding. Acknowledge and validate their feelings. Very important to validate what they're feeling is okay. Check people's well-being in both the short and long term. It's been studied and proven that actually people that do subject to a traumatic event or a critical incident, such as a natural disaster like a bushfire, it can take months, if not years, for somebody to actually go back to their previous state of well-being. Some people might get over things fairly quickly in the space of a few days to weeks. Other people will have a lot longer in terms of their recovery time frame. So there is no one-size-fits-all. We are all different, and it will take people, depending on their personality, depending on prior experiences, depending on their resilience. A whole range of different things will come into play of how they will react post a traumatic event. Offer your assistance and a listening ear, even if they haven't asked to help, as we know that social support is very important for employees, for people's well-being. Encourage full use of our services at Benestar, and I will go through some other community resources shortly. So it's very important, as mentioned, to also look after your own well-being in the situation. As discussed, please do limit your exposure to the media and footage. Make sure you're looking after your well-being from a physical perspective, such as exercising, healthy diet, nutrition, and making sure you get enough sleep. Maintain that social connectedness with colleagues, managers, family, friends. Avoid using drugs and alcohol. Often people that have gone through trauma do try and self-medicate, and as we know, that actually can be more detrimental. So we recommend, obviously, that people steer clear of alcohol. I have listed some further support from a community-based perspective. There are a whole lot more as well, but companies such as Beyond Blue, Lifeline, which is a 24-hour service, Headspace has some amazing resources from an organisational mental health perspective, as well as the fact sheets that we have put as our handouts today that can be distributed to people. And of course, through the Benestar service, we do have that confidential short-term one-on-one counselling through the My Coach service. It is completely confidential. Our clinicians are non-judgmental, and we do allow people to speak to a clinician that's convenient for their needs. So whether that's face-to-face or over the phone, we can even do live chat discussions, which are normally more of a triage, and they can resolve some things over chat, but obviously some things might get escalated to a telephone or face-to-face meeting. We do also have video or online counselling available too. And that is completely free to you and your immediate family. And in terms of contacting, the phone number that we have is on the screen now for Australia or New Zealand employees. Thank you for listening to the webinar today. I will go through lastly just one or two questions. So if you do have any questions that you'd like me to address at the end of the webinar, otherwise thank you for your time. We will send out a recording to you. Yes, you can certainly send the recording to your colleagues. I'm more than happy for you to forward the recording that you receive on. Yes, look, some of you are saying, I have one person saying that dealing with people that they know have been affected one-on-one and not looking at the big picture. The question was, what can I do to help those I know make a difference? So really, it is every individual is different with what help they want. The best advice that we can give you is listening to their needs, normalising their emotions, letting them know you're here to support them, and that collaborative decision making of asking them what do they need, how can you help them? Because some people might just literally want you to listen to them and provide advice. Other people might want donations. They might want you to help, look after the kids, make them meals, whatever it is. Everybody is different, so you need to ask. There's not one size fits all. Yeah, look, highly recommend donating if you can. So, yeah, someone has commented that some people just move on and complain about small things when there are other people that have much bigger issues to deal with. So it's really important to understand that when someone is being negative and complaining, that is a big problem for them. So our perspective might be that we look at them and feel, hang on, why are you complaining? There's someone over there that's a lot worse off than you. But we have to remember that it's still a big problem for them. So we need to treat it equally with if somebody has come to you with a much bigger impact from the fire. So as an example, say someone's really stressed out by watching the vicarious trauma, they are feeling quite stressed from the exposure to the media. And then somebody else, a colleague, might be personally affected. They might have had a house that burnt down right down the south coast of New South Wales, as an example. We need to actually treat both situations the same. And even though you might be thinking, well, hang on, that person who's lost their house is way worse off, trauma affects us all differently. And so we need to go through the same process of listening to them and offering to support where we can the same way. I hope that does make sense a little bit and addressed your question. In terms of sharing the recording, no, we actually can't share it on Facebook. We can share it. I'm happy for you to put it on a company intranet or email it to other employees, but it's not something that we could advertise on social media. Okay, good question. Someone's asked, are teenage responses different to children? So we do actually have separate webinars that we are offering that are more in depth. One is supporting our customers through the bushfires. One is supporting our employees through the bushfires, and one is supporting children and how children respond after traumatic events. We actually have a whole separate webinar on that, but just to let you know, from a response perspective, teenagers, as we know, are not quite adults yet, but they're also different to younger children. In terms of the brain and the neuroscience and how they respond to this limbic system stress response, an adult, as I mentioned briefly in the webinar, takes about 15 to 20 minutes to calm down once our limbic stress response has kicked in. A teenager takes double the amount of time. And often we forget that teenagers aren't adults. So we speak to them, we might treat them as adults, but their rational part of the brain is not fully formed yet. So there actually is a neuroscience, there's a bit of a different cognitive difference between a teenager and an adult. So we need to remember that when their emotions are heightened, and I can talk about this firsthand because I do have one teenager and one preteen, it does take them longer to recover and to calm down than it generally, of course I'm generalising here, would an adult. Thank you all for your time. I will leave it there. If I didn't get a chance to answer your questions, I will get one of our account managers to get in contact with you. Otherwise, alternatively, as I said, if it is regarding individual needs, please do call us directly. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. Hope you learned something today.